Hello everybody, welcome back. Our last week's sessions, 3 videos on homelessness. This is a topic close to my heart. My first experience working in social care is in the area of homelessness services. Found it really interesting. I'll be sharing some of my experiences and reflections on the workplace in the last of these 3 videos. First of all though, let's look at basic concepts, basic definitions. Obviously homelessness itself, what does it mean to be homeless? And the word home is hidden within that word. Thinking about that seems to be a nice starting place. So, together with your partner, what for you is home? Think about the word. What associations do you have when you hear this word? What nuances of meaning does the word have for you? And how does the word sound in your mother tongue, or indeed in other languages you speak? I find the word Heimat, it's not the same as home, but it's related to the word home. I found that utterly fantastic. What an interesting word. Think about that at the same time. What did you come up with? Obviously, a home is a place to live. It's your place to live. It's a permanent place to live. We don't call a hotel our home. That's a place where we stay. It's my place. We call it this, even if we're only renting it, even if we don't own it. It's my place. Let's go back to my place. It's a place where I belong. The word suggests some level of being settled in your home. You know, look at me, I've got my books here, big heavy books. I wouldn't carry them around from place to place, would I? The fact that they're here on my shelf suggests some feeling of me being settled in this building. It gives me safety, gives me security. I feel safe here, I feel secure here. And you can see these nuances of meaning in poems, in songs. I thought immediately of a song from when your great-grandparents were young, probably. Simon and Garfunkel's Homeward Bound, which is what, 1960s, that kind of time. I think it's written by the songwriter on the road. You know, they're on the road, they're on tour, they're giving concerts. He doesn't want to be there, he wants to be home. I wish I was homeward bound. Home where my thoughts are escaping, home where my music's playing, home where my love lies waiting silently for me. And you can see why the idea of home comes up so often in poetry and art. These feelings of nostalgia, longing for that place where we belong. The etymology of the word is really interesting. This is one of my favorite websites. You can see from the screenshot. I captured that in April 2020. What about the etymology of this word? Well, where does this come from? I won't ask you to discuss it with your partner because it's so obvious if you speak German or Swedish or one of these other Germanic languages. The online etymology dictionary tells us it comes from the Old English. Of course, it's a Germanic word, Proto-Germanic. Also with related words in other Germanic languages, Old Norse, Danish, Middle Dutch, and German, of course, with Heim. Originally coming from the Proto-Indo-European language, where the original meaning was something like to settle, to dwell, or to be home. Interesting, huh? The German word Heim, Heimat, really rich in terms of its nuances, and it is almost untranslatable in terms of what the word carries. Trying to capture it with one word in another language is really difficult. Oft as gefühlsbetonter Ausdruck enger Verbundenheit gegenüber einer bestimmten Gegend. So, you know, describes a bind, an emotional bind of feeling to a particular place. So an emotion-laden meaning. Stresses belonging, the place where I belong to, the place where I come from and may return to. You know, home is where the heart is. If you're interested in other words with this word Heim or Heimat in it, the Swedes, the Swedish Social Democrats from the 1920s had a fascinating concept, an early poetic speech about the welfare state and the idea of the welfare state as a place where your rights are protected by the Swedish Social Democrat leader at the time, Hansen, used the expression folkhemmet, so the idea of a people's home. And another fascinating term. So there you are. As you can see, I'm excited about the richness of meaning that's hidden within this Germanic language's word. I could talk about this forever, but let's not. We've got to move on to our real topic. What on earth is homeless? What does it mean to be homeless? We need a differentiated definition before we start examining this topic. If you say to me homeless, oh Magnus, my definition is not having a home. Sorry guys, That's not good enough. That really isn't. We need to get a bit richer into the various meanings of this term. So in pairs with your partner, I want you to define homeless. What does it mean? Including different categories of homelessness. Now, if you scratch your heads and think about it for a while, we really can categorize it in quite a differentiated way. We can pick up with a lot of different groupings of meanings of the word. So many have a number of categories. I'm going to mention a typology in a minute. It has 13 different subcategories. Wow, isn't that frightening? 13. That's how fine we can differentiate. Come up with what you can. Pause here. So actually the typology I've just mentioned comes from this organization here. The typology is called Ethos, the European Typology of Homelessness and Housing Exclusion. So it is something like 15 years old, so it's been used quite a lot by an interesting organization, the European Federation of National Organizations Working with the Homeless, FIANSA for short. You're thinking, why are the words all mixed up? FIANSA, why is there a first member E? The organisation is based in Brussels. I fear it comes from the French. I bet it's something like Fédération Européenne, something like that. I can't speak French. I really can't. I wish I could, but I can't. So it's a network, and they've put together 2 typologies of homelessness. The first I particularly love. The first is amazingly rich with 13 subcategories in total, grouped together in 4 clusters. They reworked this, developed this for statistical usage into a slightly different and simpler table with 6 categories and 12 subcategories. It's the first that I'm going to look at together with you. So how do these guys break it down? How do they differentiate? First, most basic category of homelessness, rooflessness. You don't have a roof over your head. In practice, this means either you're rough sleeping or you're sleeping in emergency night shelters. As a Brit, I find it logical to put these 2 together. I volunteered in an emergency night shelter in Colchester in southeast England. It's got quite a mild climate, and what you'll see there, as in many places, there really is one scene with these 2 different options. In the winter, the night shelters really get quite full. They really have full accommodation to capacity. But in summer, you often have empty beds, and it really is because people are actually sleeping out under the stars. So maybe it makes sense to actually combine those 2 categories together. There seems to be one scene using both of those options. Typically, in an emergency night shelter, you can only stay there for a maximum of, say, 28 nights. They have this because obviously the whole concept of a night shelter is it's a place with 3 beds. So they kind of move on people automatically after typically a 4-week period. Our next category, houselessness. You're houseless if you live in temporary housing for the homeless. So much of this short stay homelessness accommodation in shelters, in short stay hostels or medium stay hostels. Migrant accommodation is also in this category, also women's refuges, also people who are living in institutions, maybe a psychiatric hospital or a prison, and you're due to be released. If you're at that point in your accommodation there, you'll also be in this category. Our next category, we're kind of moving on in terms of security, but we can still term this category insecure housing. Think of long-term homelessness services. You know, you're allowed to stay there for a number of months, but you're not expected to grow old there. That category of homelessness services. Also, those tenancies where you have an informal tenancy arrangement. Maybe you're staying with a friend, you know, sofa searching, so to say. Maybe you're using accommodation which you pay for cash in hand. You don't have a tenancy agreement. You don't have any tenants' rights. Or if you're illegally living on land, maybe you're squatting in an empty building. This category also includes those who live under the threat of eviction, meaning that their landlord, the person they pay rent to, has asked them to leave. So those people are included here as well. Also, and again, I think this makes sense, those living under a threat of violence. The final category, inadequate housing. This is an interesting category because it really shows how broad this organization's definitions are. Temporary housing structures, I'm guessing things like tents or makeshift housing. Mobile homes, if you're in some kind of camper van or caravan, trailers, very common in the States, of course. Homes which are built but unfit for dwelling. Typically, these buildings are certified as such. You know, usually the council will be able to say which dwellings can be lived in and which which can't. So if you're, say, sleeping in an office, that would fit this category. Finally, accommodation where you're overcrowded, when you have too many people in that flat or house. So as you can see, 4 categories, but this really is the 13 subcategories that I mentioned a few moments ago. Once again, natter with your partner briefly. How do you find this typology? Any critical comments? Are there any kind of critical comments, any limitations of this model? Pause here, natter with your partner. Critical comments. I mean, I think most people, when they see this, are dazzled by the detail. It really is an attempt to really investigate what homelessness means, and not the basic no roof over my head idea of homelessness, but this deeper idea of insecure housing, housing exclusion, of course, part of the title of this framework. So I'm dazzled by its richness. Critical comments, I'm sure the organization itself is well aware of this. An interesting question is, how useful is this for statistics? You know, is the broadness of this categorization, does that correspond to, say, how governments also count their homelessness numbers? And obviously, to some extent, it isn't. Governments tend to have more narrow categories of homelessness. Certainly 0.4 might not be even known in many, many countries. Nonetheless, I find it really, really quite fascinating, and I was excited coming across this for the first time something like 10 years ago. Anything missing? Is there anything missing in our ethos understanding of homelessness here? I think there is. I was looking at McNaughton, and she identifies 2 additional perspectives on homelessness. Any guesses what they are? Once again, pause here, natter with your neighbour. What did you come up with? The 2 missing categorizations. Firstly, this is really, really banal actually. In a sense, homelessness is simply that which gives you the legal status of homelessness in your country. So a very simple answer, maybe a simplistic answer: homelessness, that status which entitles you to housing services in your country. It might not entitle you to actually have a house or a home, but it will typically entitle you to advice services or similar. Is this a good or a bad answer to our definitions question? Maybe have a quick natter with your partner. Pause here. I don't really know. Some people like these legal definitions. As a social worker, I'm always a little bit frustrated by them. Yes, they answer the concrete question, can I get a service? But they're not very good ways of investigating a topic. You know, they're not useful sociologically. A nice example of this, maybe, for example, the idea of disability. What is disability? A simple answer is that which gets you the chance of being certified as being disabled in the disability rights law in your own country. But if you look at these laws, you'll find lots of legal jargon, and it doesn't necessarily relate to how we think about disability as disabled people or working with disabled people. So from a sociological perspective, not very satisfying, but obviously of great practical use. I invite you to think of 2 extra meanings of homelessness, or extra categories of homelessness in a sense, 2 extra perspectives on homelessness. The last one is quite fascinating, but Morton notes that we can think about the subjective meanings of homelessness. In other words, how it feels. And she's drawing on ideas from Somerville here. Somerville notes homelessness, shelter, hearth, heart, privacy, abode, roots, and paradise. So picking what, 6, 7 terms, trying to capture what home means. And I think this brings us back to our original idea of the nuances of meaning within the word home. You know, home can be all of these different things. To give concrete examples of applying this concept, you know, is a home something that I own? You know, it's mine. It's and one of my emotions is belonging. I belong there. Does it belong to me? You know, so how is it with home ownership? Fascinatingly, you can check this. I was looking at Wikipedia. You can actually see a table there ranking the percentage of home ownership by country. Varies amazingly. I thought about this topic coming to Germany. In the German-speaking countries, Switzerland, Austria, Germany, you have very, very low levels of home ownership. People rent quite long-term in Germany. So only something like 50% of people are living in their home. In Norway, it's 80%. In Russia and China, I think China was almost 90%. So very, very different numbers. How is it in a country like Norway or Russia or China, where most people do own their homes? How is it then to not own your own home? You know, does that give you an extra feeling of insecurity? So, you know, let's look at it subjectively. How does it feel for you being in your home? Again, another idea linked to this. What about if your home is in the kind of place where nobody really wants to live? What about if you live in a socially deprived area, high crime, vandalism, and drug use? When I worked in homelessness services, I was sometimes a little bit ashamed of the modesty of the services that we were offering. On homelessness hostels, for example, you typically get a room where you can cook in one corner. So it's kind of like a bed-sit model. And I thought to myself, you know, it's not really the kind of home that I would like to be in. But it's worth noting, a lot of our clients came from very poor areas, from socially deprived parts of the locality. And in a sense, they were quite used to having modest surroundings. If anything, I think they found our accommodation really quite nice. They were getting away from, you know, the high crime or the vandalism or the drug use of the social housing estates where they grew up. So what is it like, you know, for kids to be in this milieu, confronted with things like criminality, you know, seeing needles lying around, seeing graffiti, or seeing, you know, pee-pee in the lift of the housing block? You know, how much can you be at home? How much can you feel at home in that place? The council, the lawyers might say, oh, they've got a home, but if that's really the only home you've got. And it's something to think about, isn't it? And again, I invite you to reflect on this. How do you find this idea of subjective approaches to housing and homelessness? Yeah, let's come to a close for this video. Hope you've enjoyed it. Check out the second two as well. Cheerio, thank you.